Hey there, brave souls. Before we dive into these 10 true disturbing Thanksgiving Black Friday horror stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more terrifying tales, and comment your city name below. We'd love to know where our fearless viewers are from. Now, grab a warm blanket, get cozy, and prepare for a chilling ride till the very end, if you dare. Let's begin. It started with the turkey. I remember the day I bought it, just a week before Thanksgiving. I was driving home from work, exhausted and dreading the holiday already. My family was coming over, my judgmental mother, my loudmouth brother, and his obnoxious kids. I wasn't in the mood to host, but tradition demanded it. So, when I saw the roadside stand with the hand-painted sign that read, "Fresh turkeys cheap," I pulled over without thinking. The stand was run by an old man with yellowed eyes and a smile that didn't reach his face. He didn't say much, just pointed to the turkeys laid out on a folding table. They looked normal enough, plump and fresh, so I handed him the cash and took the biggest one. He wrapped it in brown paper and handed it to me with a nod. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him still standing there, watching me go. At first, everything seemed fine. I stored the turkey in the fridge, planning to thaw it a couple of days before Thanksgiving. But then, I noticed something strange. The turkey didn't smell. Not the usual raw meat smell, not even a hint of anything. It was as if it were completely odorless. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just really fresh. Then came the whispers. It started the night before Thanksgiving. I was in the kitchen prepping the side dishes when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. I turned around, but the room was empty. I chalked it up to stress and kept working. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, until I could almost make out words. "Cook me!" I froze, my knife hovering over a pile of carrots. The voice was soft but clear, coming from the fridge. My heart pounded as I walked over and opened the door. The turkey sat there, still wrapped in its brown paper, but something about it felt wrong. The paper was damp, as if the turkey were sweating, and when I touched it, it was warm. I slammed the door shut and told myself I was imagining, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed me to bed, echoing in my ears as I tried to sleep. "Cook me! Cook me! Cook me!" By morning, I was a wreck. I considered throwing the turkey out, but my family would be there in a few hours, and I didn't have time to get another one. So I did the only thing I could think of. I cooked it. The moment I put it in the oven, the whispers stopped. I thought I was in the clear. But as the turkey roasted, the smell began to fill the house. It wasn't the savory, mouth-watering aroma of a holiday meal. It was sickly sweet, almost cloying, with an undertone of something rotten. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep going. When the turkey was done, I pulled it out of the oven and set it on the table. It looked perfect, golden brown and glistening. But as I carved into it, I noticed something strange. The meat was too red, almost like beef, and it didn't pull apart the way turkey should. It was stringy, fibrous, and when I tasted a small piece, it was gamey and metallic. My family arrived soon after, and I tried to act normal. But as we sat down to eat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My mother took a bite and frowned. "This doesn't taste like turkey," she said. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because as I looked at the turkey on the table, I saw something move, a faint pulse, like a heartbeat, rippling beneath the skin. I dropped my fork and backed away, but no one else seemed to notice. They kept eating, their faces blank, their eyes empty. And then the whispers started again. "You cooked me. Now eat me." I screamed and ran to the kitchen, but the turkey was there too, sitting on the counter, fully intact. It shouldn't have been possible. I'd carved it, served it, watched my family eat it. But there it was, whole and unbroken. I grabbed a knife and stabbed it, over and over, until the blade was slick with blood. But the turkey didn't stop. It kept whispering, louder and louder, until the words were a deafening roar in my head. "Eat me! Eat me! Eat me!" I don't know how long it went on. Hours, maybe days. When I finally came to, I was sitting at the table, my hands covered in blood. The turkey was gone, but the whispers were still there, quieter now, almost soothing. My family was gone too. I don't know where they went. I don't want to know. All I know is that the whispers haven't stopped. They're always there, in the back of my mind, urging me to cook, to eat, to feed. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see the turkey's face staring back at me, its eyes yellow and its smile too wide. I don't think I'll ever be free of it. But maybe you will be. Just don't buy the turkey. It was supposed to be a joke. Every year, my friends and I made a tradition of going Black Friday shopping together. Not because we needed anything, but because we loved the chaos, the crowds, the screaming, the thrill of snagging a deal. This year, though, we decided to take it a step further. We were going to break into the mall the night before and film ourselves shopping in the empty stores. It was stupid, sure, but we thought it would be hilarious. We waited until midnight when the mall was closed and the parking lot was deserted. The security guard's car was gone and the lights were off, so we figured it was safe. We pried open a side door with a crowbar and slipped inside, laughing and shushing each other like kids. The mall was eerie at night. The fluorescent lights were off, leaving only the dim glow of emergency exit signs to guide us. Our footsteps echoed on the tiled floor, and the mannequins in the store windows seemed to watch us as we passed. "This is way creepier than I thought it would be," Jenna whispered, clutching her phone like a flashlight. "Relax," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "It's just a mall." We started in the electronics store, filming ourselves pretending to shoplift TVs and gaming consoles. It was funny at first, but the silence was unnerving. The air felt heavy, like the mall was holding its breath, waiting for something. Then we heard the music. It was faint at first, a tinny melody drifting from somewhere deeper in the mall. We froze, listening. "Is that Christmas music?" Kyle asked. "It's coming from the food court," Jenna said, pointing down the corridor. We followed the sound, our laughter fading as the music grew louder. When we reached the food court, we stopped dead in our tracks. The lights were on, not all of them, just a few scattered bulbs above the empty tables and chairs. The music was coming from a speaker overhead, a cheerful holiday tune that felt completely out of place in the dark, deserted mall. And then we saw the store. It was tucked into a corner of the food court, a small, unassuming shop with a flickering neon sign that read, "Doorbuster Deals." The display window was filled with random items, a toaster, a pair of shoes, a stuffed animal, all marked with ridiculously low prices. "What the hell?" Kyle said. "I've never seen this store before." "Maybe it's new," Jenna said, but she didn't sound convinced. I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The store's door was slightly ajar, and a faint, sweet smell wafted out, like burnt sugar and old wood. "Let's check it out," I said, pushing the door open. The inside of the store was cluttered and dimly lit, with shelves crammed full of random items. A vintage record player sat on a table near the door, its needle scratching against an empty turntable. A mirror hung on the wall, its surface cloudy and cracked. "This place is weird," Jenna said, picking up a porcelain doll with chipped paint. "Weird, but cheap," Kyle said, holding up a pair of sneakers. "These are like $5." I wandered deeper into the store, my eyes drawn to a small, ornate box on a high shelf. It was made of dark wood, with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and move when I looked at them. I reached for it, but as soon as my fingers touched the box, the music stopped. The silence was deafening. "Guys!" I called, turning around. They were gone. The store was empty, the door closed. I ran to the window and looked out, but the food court was dark again, the lights and music gone. "Jenna! Kyle!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty mall. No response. I pulled out my phone to call them, but there was no signal. The screen flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw something moving in the reflection, a shadowy figure standing behind me. I spun around, but the store was still empty. Then I heard the whispers. They were faint at first, coming from the walls, the shelves, the floor. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, hungry, desperate. I backed toward the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle wouldn't even turn. "Let me out!" I screamed, pounding on the glass. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I turned around, and that's when I saw them. The mannequins. They were standing in the aisles, their blank faces turned toward me. I hadn't noticed them before, but now they were everywhere, their plastic limbs stiff and unnatural, and they were moving. One of them tilted its head, the joints creaking like old wood. Another raised its arm, pointing at me with a finger that was too long, too sharp. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a lamp, and swung it at the closest mannequin. It shattered into pieces, but the others kept coming, their movements jerky and mechanical. I backed into a corner, my heart pounding as they closed in. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that made my head spin. And then I saw the mirror. It was hanging on the wall behind me, its surface rippling like water. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I just jumped. The world went black. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the food court, the store gone as it had never existed. Jenna and Kyle were there too, looking dazed, confused. "What happened?" Jenna asked, rubbing her head. "I don't know," I said, but I could still hear the whispers, faint and distant, like a memory. We left the mall that night and never spoke about it again. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear the music, and I know the store is still there, waiting for its next customer. So, if you're out shopping this Black Friday, and you see a little store with a flickering neon sign, don't go in. It's not worth the discount. Ethan sighed as he leaned against the counter of the nearly empty gas station. Thanksgiving night had been slow, the roads quiet except for the occasional car speeding past on the highway. He glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. Only a little longer until his shift was over. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, filling the silence. He stepped outside for a quick breath of fresh air, feeling the cold night air bite against his skin. The vast, empty parking lot stretched before him, lit only by the dim glow of the station's neon sign. He turned to head back inside, but as his hand reached for the door handle, the door chimed behind him. Someone had walked in. Ethan froze. He hadn't heard a car pull up. Inside, a tall, gaunt man in a tattered coat stood by the refrigerator section, staring blankly at the rows of bottled water. His clothes were old, too old, and his skin looked dry, almost papery. Ethan's stomach twisted. Something about the man felt wrong. He stepped inside, clearing his throat. "You need help finding something?" The man turned his head, not his body, just his head, and stared at Ethan with glassy, unblinking eyes. His lips never moved, but when he spoke, his voice was a dry rasp. "You should stay inside." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me?" The man didn't answer. He picked up a bottle of water and shuffled toward the register. Ethan rang up the purchase, his hands trembling slightly. The man pulled a brittle yellow dollar bill from his pocket, the paper crumbling at the edges like it had been buried underground. When Ethan reached to take it, the man's fingers brushed his skin, ice cold, unnaturally stiff. The register beeped as it processed the transaction. The man took his bottle, turned, and walked out without another word. Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking off the creeping unease. He needed to stop letting the graveyard shift get to him. Then, the phone rang, a sharp, piercing tone in the empty store. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" The line crackled with static. Then a voice whispered through the receiver. "Don't leave the store." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His own voice had just spoken those words. His eyes flicked to the security monitor. The footage of the store's entrance played back in real time. He rewound to a minute earlier, watching the moment when the man had walked in, except he never did. The footage showed the store's door opening, but no one stepping inside. The security camera captured Ethan talking to no one. Ethan's stomach clenched. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he rewound again. No matter how many times he played it back, the man wasn't there. Then the phone rang again. He picked up the receiver with a shaking hand. This time, the voice on the other end was not his own. "Do not leave the store. Do not run. You are already here." The lights flickered. A strange pressure filled the air, like something unseen was pressing against the walls. Ethan turned toward the entrance. The man was standing outside, staring in. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Then the store door chimed. A second customer entered. A woman this time with features that looked slightly off. Her mouth was too wide, her eyes unfocused, her skin a shade too pale. She didn't buy anything. She just stood there watching him. Ethan backed toward the stockroom. His fingers fumbled for his phone. 911. He dialed, the ringing loud in his ear. The call connected. 911, what's your emergency? Ethan let out a shaky breath. Something's wrong. I'm at the station on Route 6 and there's these people. Do not leave the store. The dispatcher's voice was his own. The line went dead. Ethan turned back toward the monitors. The cameras showed the store from different angles, each one static and cold. His hands trembled as he cycled through the footage. Then, he saw the man again, standing outside, but this time, there were two of them. Ethan's stomach twisted into knots. He ran for the door, wrenching it open and sprinting outside, desperate to get away from the store, away from the nightmare. But when he stepped out, he found himself back behind the counter. The store was exactly as it had been when his shift began. The clock on the wall still read 2:47 a.m. The door chimed. A new customer walked in. Ethan looked up and saw him. The man at the counter, his own reflection, stared back, confused, holding a crumpled receipt. Ethan turned to the security monitor, his breathing ragged. The screen flickered. The footage showed rows of identical Ethan, all standing behind identical counters, all trapped in an endless loop of working, watching, waiting. Outside the store, staring in, were all the customers. The store never closed. The shift never ended. And the last customer was always you. Black Friday had always been chaos, but this year was worse. Jenna had been working at Willow Point Mall for the past 2 years, manning the register at Trendy Finds, a small clothing store tucked away near the back entrance. She hated this. Angry customers, long hours, and a mess that never seemed to end. By 2:15 a.m., the crowds had finally started to thin. The store was trashed, clothes strewn everywhere, fitting rooms destroyed. Jenna's coworker, Marissa, had disappeared on a break over an hour ago, still hadn't returned. Sighing, Jenna made her way to the back stockroom, pushing open the heavy door. The fluorescent lights flickered as she stepped inside. "Marissa?" Her voice echoed in the tight space. No answer. Something smelled off. A damp, rotting stench filled the air. She checked between the storage racks. Empty. But as she turned to leave, her foot hit something soft. A shoe. A black sneaker, slightly scuffed. sticking out from behind a pile of unopened boxes. Jenna's chest tightened. She slowly reached down, grabbed the shoe. A pale, ice-cold foot was still inside it. Her scream caught in her throat as she stumbled back. The foot twitched. Then, it slid back behind the boxes, vanishing into the darkness. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone, but there was no service. The signal icon blinked. No connection. The lights above flickered again, buzzing louder this. She wasn't alone in the stockroom. The air shifted. A soft rustling noise came from behind the racks, like someone was dragging fabric across the floor. Slowly, Jenna turned her head. A hand, thin, elongated fingers, nails cracked and blackened, peeked out from behind the boxes. Then came the whisper. "I tried to leave." Jenna bolted. She ran straight for the door, shoving it open, bursting back into the store. The messy racks, the broken shelves, everything looked normal again, except the entire store was full. Hundreds of customers stood completely still, silent, staring. Their faces were wrong, expressionless, eyes wide, their bodies slightly too still. The mannequins in the window mimicked their frozen posture, and then all at once they turned toward her. Jenna stumbled backward, her breath ragged. "What the hell?" The store lights cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. She felt something cold and damp brush against her shoulder. A whisper, right against her ear. "It's still Black Friday." Jenna ran. She sprinted through the aisles, heart pounding, knocking over clothing racks. She saw the exit door, the glowing red exit sign just ahead. She lunged for it, shoved her entire weight against the glass. The doors didn't budge. She turned, pressing herself against the glass. Behind her, the store was changing. The mannequins weren't mannequins. They were moving. Something tall, thin, and faceless stood behind the register, its fingers tapping against the counter in a slow, rhythmic pattern. The mall lights flickered as a distorted voice echoed over the intercom. "Attention shoppers, Black Friday will continue forever." The doors suddenly swung open behind her. She fell backward, not into the mall, but back into the store. She was standing behind the cash register. The store was reset. The aisles were neat again, the shelves perfectly stocked. The clock on the wall read 12 a.m. The doors chimed. A customer walked in. Jenna looked up. It was herself. The intercom crackled again. "Thank you for shopping. Your shift has just begun." I never believed in ghosts, but that changed on Thanksgiving night. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. My parents had gone out of town, leaving me alone in our house, a modest place on the edge of the woods. I didn't mind. I wasn't a fan of family gatherings anyway. By 8 p.m., the turkey leftovers were in the fridge, and I had settled in on the couch, with a movie playing in the background. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The night felt heavy. At 9:12 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting it. Through the peephole, I saw nothing. Just the dark, empty porch. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I opened the door slightly, peering outside. The wind rushed past me, carrying a strange, rotten smell. A smell that reminded me of wet earth, of something buried. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of my yard, half hidden behind the trees. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long. It didn't move. It just watched. I slammed the door and locked it. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The wind outside grew stronger. I could hear it whistling through the cracks in the windows, but there was something else beneath it, a whispering sound. The lights flickered. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. The call didn't go through, just static. Then, 3 slow knocks on the door. I stopped breathing. I backed away, my eyes locked on the front door. The knocks came again, slow, deliberate, and then a voice. "It's Thanksgiving." A sickening shiver crawled down my spine. The voice was deep, hoarse, like it came from rotting vocal cords. I wanted to run, but something inside me screamed, "Don't move!" I reached for my phone again, trying to text a friend, but when I looked at the screen, my messages were gone. The home screen was different. The time read 9:12 p.m., the same minute the doorbell had first rung. A sharp scratching sound came from the front door. I forced myself forward, inching toward the peephole, my breath shaky. I didn't want to look, but some terrible part of me needed to. I peered through the peephole. The figure was right there. A skeletal face, sunken eyes black as coal, and a mouth stretched into a too-wide grin. Its skin looked like cracked leather, peeling at the edges. And then it tilted its head. "You forgot to set a place for." My vision blurred with terror. The lights went out. The heater shut off. The whole house plunged into silence. I ran. Sprinting through the dark, I fumbled for the back door. The handle wouldn't turn. It was like it had fused shut. From the hallway, I heard footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps. It was inside. I turned. my back pressed, my breathing ragged. A shadow stretched across the. Then, just as I felt my mind slipping into panic, everything snapped back. The lights were on, the heater hummed, the TV played its movie again. I stood in the living room, my phone in my hand. The time read 8 p.m. Dinner sat untouched on the table. The front door was closed. Had I imagined it? I turned slowly, my body trembling. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. There was an extra plate on the table, a plate I didn't set, and sitting on it was a piece of raw, rotting meat. The wind howled outside again. Somewhere in the distance, I swore I heard a whispering voice laughing. I always hated Black Friday, but this year I needed the deals. Money was tight, and I had promised my younger brother Danny a new gaming console. The big chain stores were out of stock, but a small local electronics shop downtown advertised an exclusive Black Friday sale, one night only. The store was called Old Circuit Electronics. I had never heard of it before. The ad was vague. Limited stock, unbeatable prices, basement sale. The website had no customer reviews, no location history, just an address and a countdown clock. That should have been my first warning. By the time I got there, the main floor was almost empty. Just a few old televisions, dusty shelves, and a single cashier behind the counter. A thin man with sunken eyes stared at me without blinking. "Here for the sale?" His voice was dry, almost mechanical. I nodded. He didn't ask what I was looking for. He just pointed to a door in the back. A sign above it read, "Basement sale. Enter at your own risk." A chill ran through me. The staircase was long, too long. The further I descended, the darker it got. The air smelled wrong, like metal and damp earth. Finally, I reached the bottom. The basement was massive. A wide, open space filled with rows of tall metal shelves, flickering fluorescent lights, and hundreds of people. But something was off. Nobody was moving. They all stood perfectly still, backs turned to me, heads slightly tilted downward, like mannequins. A speaker crackled overhead. "Welcome, valued customer. The sale has begun." As soon as the voice spoke, the people twitched. Then, in perfect unison, they all turned toward me. Their faces were identical. Every single one of them had my face. 100 versions, staring with empty expressions. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The lights flickered and the speaker crackled again. "Please make your selection before closing time." The crowd of me moved forward. Their mouths didn't open, but I heard whispering. 1,000 overlapping voices, all inside my head. "Stay with us." I ran. I didn't care where. I just ran through the aisles, past flickering displays and TV screens that only showed my own terrified face. Then I saw it. At the end of the aisle, standing behind a counter, was a tall figure. It wasn't like the others. It was stretching, growing. Its body was black and shifting like static on a broken screen. It had no face, just a hole where a mouth should be, and it was smiling. "Your total is due." I turned and sprinted back toward the stairs. The voices grew louder, the clones of me reaching out with twitching hands. I tripped, crashing into a shelf, knocking down boxes. A console spilled onto the floor in front of me. It was the one Danny wanted, brand new, perfect condition. For a moment, I felt the urge to take it. That's when I heard the footsteps. Something massive was moving toward me. I forced myself up, lungs burning, and ran. The shelves blurred past me, the whispers morphing into screams. As I reached the staircase, the floor split open. Hands, pale, identical hands, shot up from the darkness, grabbing at my legs. "Come back! You belong here!" I tore free, lunging up the steps. The moment I reached the top, the door slammed shut behind me. The store was empty. The cashier was gone. The aisles were coated in dust. The neon sign outside flickered. Closed. Out of business. Since 1994. I bolted for my car. The store wasn't there anymore. Just an abandoned lot. At home, I found something in my pocket. A receipt. It had my name on it. The item purchased, one new customer. Transaction complete. My reflection in the bathroom mirror lagged behind. Then it smiled. Thanksgiving had always been a small affair in my family. Just me, my parents, and my little sister Ava. This year, though, things were different. Our parents were visiting relatives out of town, leaving Ava and me alone for the holiday. She wasn't thrilled about it. "Thanksgiving is boring without family," she had whined. "Can we at least do something fun?" That's how we ended up at the old house on Cypress Street. It was an abandoned Victorian-style home at the end of the road, surrounded by dead trees. The house had a reputation, stories of people going in and never coming out. Kids at school dared each other to step inside, but no one ever lasted long. Ava had heard the rumors too, but she was 12 and still thought ghosts were exciting, not terrifying. "If we take a picture inside, I'll believe you when you say it's haunted," she said, arms crossed. I sighed, glancing up at the rotting porch, the broken windows, the way the house seemed to breathe in the cold November air. I should have said no. The front door was unlocked. It groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a long, dark hallway. Dust floated in the air. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and the air was thick with the scent of something rotting. We stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath us. The air was wrong, stale and pressing like the house itself was watching. I took out my phone and snapped a quick picture. There, happy now? Ava frowned. Take another. I wasn't ready. I sighed and took another shot. Then I froze. In the photo, there was someone else standing behind her. A tall, thin figure, dressed in black. I turned my head slowly. There was nothing there. Ava, we need to go. She rolled her eyes. Let's just look around a little. Before I could protest, she darted toward the staircase. The second floor was worse. The air smelled stronger, like decayed meat. The walls had deep scratches. Some of the doors were nailed shut. Ava's excitement faded. She looked uneasy. A low sound echoed through the hallway, a knocking. Not from the walls. From inside one of the locked rooms. I grabbed Ava's arm. We're leaving. Now. Then the knocking stopped, and the door at the end of the hall opened on its own. Darkness stretched beyond the doorway. A footstep. Ava whimpered. Something moved inside the room, and then we heard it. Dinner is ready. The voice was wrong. Not a whisper, not a growl, just empty. I turned and ran, yanking Ava with me. The hallway stretched. The stairs seemed longer. The front door was so far away. Behind us, something crawled. Its hands scraped against the floor, moving too fast, too erratic. Stay for dinner. We reached the front door. I threw my weight against it, nearly falling outside as it finally gave way. Ava screamed. I turned back. The house was empty. No creature, no voices, just the cold wind whistling through the broken windows. We ran all the way home. That night, I checked my phone again. The picture was still there, the tall, thin figure behind Ava, but this time, it was closer, and its face looked exactly like mine. Thanksgiving had always been a time for family and togetherness, but this year felt different. I had just moved into my new apartment, a cozy little place on the edge of town. It was perfect, at least on the surface, but there was something about it that always made me feel watched. It was on Thanksgiving Day that I finally decided to invite my old friend Rachel over. We hadn't seen each other in months, and after everything that had happened, I thought it would be a nice distraction. I had the turkey roasting in the oven, and the apartment was warm, filled with the rich smell of spices. Everything felt peaceful, until the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, expecting Rachel, but standing there was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with a thin, tight-lipped smile and piercing blue eyes. Good evening, miss, he said in a smooth, almost rehearsed voice. I'm your neighbor. I live just across the hall. I froze. I had never seen him before. I was wondering if I could join you for Thanksgiving dinner. I live alone, and I noticed you hadn't had any guests yet. I looked behind him, but his door was closed. No lights on, no sign of life. There was something off about his smile, something too friendly about the way he spoke. But the loneliness in his voice made me hesitate. Sure, I said finally, stepping aside to let him in. I'm actually just about to serve dinner. He entered, walking with a strange, awkwardly stiff gait. I led him to the kitchen where the table was set, trying to push aside the unease settling in my stomach. The man didn't seem to take a seat immediately. Instead, he stood by the window, staring out at the street. He didn't speak. I watched him for a moment before heading to the kitchen. When I returned with the food, he was still standing there, only now he was looking at me with an intensity that made me feel like I was being studied. I hope you don't mind me saying, he began, his voice suddenly low and almost conspiratorial, but I've been watching you. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. From my apartment, he explained. I've been keeping an eye on you. You're the only one who doesn't seem to know. Know what? His gaze hardened for that you shouldn't be here. My throat went dry. The air around us seemed to chill, and suddenly I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. A soft creak echoed from behind me. I spun around, half expecting Rachel to have arrived, but the apartment was empty. The man smiled again. It was a sickening smile, like he was enjoying some private joke. Don't worry, he whispered. You'll understand soon enough. And then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. I turned toward the door. It couldn't be Rachel. I wasn't expecting anyone else. I opened the door to find nothing, just empty air. But then I noticed something else, a trail of dark stains on the ground leading to the hallway. I closed the door quickly, my heart pounding. When I turned back, the man was gone. Suddenly, everything felt wrong. The apartment seemed too quiet, the lights too dim, the air too thick. I went to check the hallway, but as I walked toward the door, I heard a faint scratching sound behind me. I turned quickly. In the reflection of the window, I saw something. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the shadows. It was him, the man. But now he looked different, darker. His smile was gone, replaced with a wide, gaping mouth that stretched too far, almost like it was eating itself, and he was moving toward me. I ran. I didn't look back. When I burst out of the apartment, I slammed the door behind me. but I could still hear him, scratching at the walls. I don't know how I made it back to my car. My hands were shaking, my vision blurring. I sped away, but I could still feel him out there, watching, waiting, and every Thanksgiving since, I've felt him nearby. I've never seen the old man again. I don't even know his name, but I know he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to invite himself back in. The invitation came in the mail a week before Thanksgiving. I wasn't expecting it, but there it was, an old-fashioned handwritten card with elegant looping script. You are cordially invited to a special Thanksgiving dinner. The feast will be held at the Harrow House. Come hungry. The address was unfamiliar to me, and the words seemed too formal, almost too old-fashioned for something like Thanksgiving. But there was something oddly compelling about it. I had no family. My parents had died years ago, and I had spent the last few holidays alone. This seemed like an invitation I couldn't turn down. The night of Thanksgiving, I arrived at the address. Harrow House stood at the end of a long, narrow street, hidden behind a thicket of trees. The house looked ancient, covered in ivy, its windows dark. The gates creaked as I pushed them open, feeling a slight unease rise in my chest. But as I approached the door, I saw a figure standing on the porch, a tall, slender woman in a long black dress. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and she smiled at me with unnerving precision. "Welcome," she said in a voice that was too smooth, too practiced. "We've been waiting for you." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, stepping inside. The foyer was dark, lit only by the faint glow of candles flickering in ornate silver holders. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Harrow, led me down a narrow hall. The air felt heavy, thick with the smell of something burning. "Please make yourself comfortable," she said, gesturing to a large wooden table at the center of the room. It was set for dozens of guests, though the only chairs that were occupied were two at the far end of the table. A man, older than me, sat there with his hands folded neatly in front of him. He smiled, his teeth far too white. "Please join us," he said, his voice too calm. "It's always a pleasure to welcome new guests." I took a seat hesitantly. Mrs. Harrow stood at the head of the table, her hands clasped in front of her as she stared at me with a strange, almost hungry gaze. The food was strange. At first glance, it looked like an extravagant spread. Roasted turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, the works. But as I looked closer, I saw something off about it. The turkey's skin was unnaturally smooth, almost waxy, and the stuffing seemed to move slightly as though something was shifting within it. I looked away, trying not to dwell on it. But the longer I stayed, the more uneasy I. The guests, all seemingly dressed in formal, old-fashioned clothing, didn't speak. They just stared, their eyes following me as I took my seat and began to eat, their eyes empty and cold. The room grew colder, and I could hear the faint sound of scratching somewhere far in the distance. As I took a bite of my food, I felt something wrong in my throat, like the texture was too heavy, too dense. I forced it down, but it was as though the food was filling me up too quickly, too forcefully. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, cold tingle at the back of my neck. The man at the end of the table leaned forward slightly, his smile widening. "You're enjoying the feast, aren't you?" I nodded, though my stomach was turning. The woman, Mrs. Harrow, watched me with dark eyes. "Good. It's so much better when the first course is fresh." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. The words lingered in the air like a thick fog. I felt the heat of the room turn to an icy chill that settled deep in my bones. I turned to look at the other guests. Their faces were becoming more and more distorted, shifting as though their features were being pulled. I glanced back at the table, and the food seemed to change. The turkey, once golden and tempting, now appeared decayed, its flesh dark and rotting. The mashed potatoes were no longer smooth, but instead looked like maggots, wriggling beneath the surface. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Something whispered in the back of my mind, and I realized with growing horror that the guests at the table weren't guests at all. They were lost souls. Their bodies were decaying, and their faces were masks of horror, forever frozen in time. They had been invited to this feast, just like me, but they had never left. I bolted from my seat, stumbling backward, knocking over the chair. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls narrowing with each step I took. The guests didn't move, but their eyes followed me, their gaze turning into cold, dead stares. I ran for but it was no use. The walls of the house were closing in, and every doorway I reached led me into another dark, endless hallway. I was trapped. The last thing I heard was the woman's voice behind, soft but ominous. "Dinner is never over," and then the world went dark. Black Friday was always a time for madness. The chaos of the crowds, the desperate hunt for the best deals, the excitement of snagging something before anyone else. This year, however, there was an ad that caught my eye. A new store, one that I hadn't seen before. It was called Hollow's End. The ad claimed it had unbelievable prices on items I couldn't even imagine. Intrigued, I decided to check it out. The location was a little out of the way, tucked in the back streets, but I didn't mind. After all, it was Black Friday, and nothing could beat finding a hidden gem. I arrived at the store just as the clock struck midnight. The building was strangely old-fashioned, its faded sign hanging crookedly above the door. There were no bright lights, no signs of life, just an eerie glow spilling from the cracks in the windows. It felt like it had been abandoned for years, forgotten maybe. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the dim bell above it ringing softly. Inside, the store was unlike anything I'd ever seen. There were no shelves stocked with regular Black Friday deals, no electronics, clothes, or toys. Instead, the aisles were filled with oddities, antique furniture, rusting tools, stacks of old photographs, a vintage typewriter, still covered in dust. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, but there was a strange warmth too, like the store itself had a pulse. A man stood behind the counter, his face hidden in shadow. He was tall, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that seemed to belong to another time. His voice was smooth, but there was something wrong about it. "You're here for the midnight sale, aren't you?" he asked, his eyes glinting in the dim light. I nodded, feeling a twinge of unease. "What's the sale about?" He smiled, and for the first time, I noticed the sharpness of his teeth. "Everything in the store is yours, for the right price. But be careful," he added, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Some things have a cost that's more than you can afford." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around, uneasy but too intrigued to leave. I wandered deeper into the store, looking at the odd items on display. I felt like I was being pulled into something I couldn't escape from. Every object seemed to whisper its own dark history. In the back corner of the store, I saw something that caught my attention, a beautiful, ornate mirror. The glass was old, but the frame was gilded, detailed with vines and twisting designs. It was the perfect centerpiece for my living room. I walked over to it, drawn by its strange allure. As I reached out to touch the glass, the reflection in the mirror shifted. Instead of my own face staring back at me, I saw a different version of myself, older, with hollow eyes and a smile twisted into something inhuman. I stepped back, heart pounding. The reflection continued to stare at me, grinning wider now, as if it were mocking me. "Do you like it?" The storekeeper's voice came from behind me, making me jump. "That mirror has been passed down through generations. It has a history." I turned to him, my voice shaky. "What kind of history?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured to the mirror. "It shows you more than just your reflection. It shows you your true self." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. "What does that mean?" He stepped closer, his breath cold on my ear. "It means that some people are never meant to leave. You're lucky to have arrived tonight. The sale only happens once every decade." I felt the world around me tighten. The air grew thick, and my chest tightened as I realized that something was wrong. Before I could react, the man reached for the mirror, pushing it toward me. "I'll make you a deal. Buy this, and everything you've ever wanted will be yours. But there's always a price. The question is, are you willing to pay it?" His smile was too wide now, his eyes burning with a strange hunger. I hesitated. The store seemed to grow darker, the walls closer, as if the space was slowly closing in on me. The mirrors, the photographs, the objects, they were all watching. I reached for my wallet, but before I could pull it out, the storekeeper's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. "You can't leave without paying," he whispered, his voice now a low growl. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The room began to spin. I saw flashes of images, dark faces, twisted figures, and barren landscapes, all flashing across the mirrors. I screamed, but it felt like no sound came out. When the spinning stopped, I found myself standing at the front door again, holding the mirror in my hands. The storekeeper was gone, and the building was silent, as if it had never been there at all. I stumbled outside into the cold night, the mirror heavy in my arms. I never went back to that, but every time I look into the mirror now, I see that other version, the one with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. It's getting closer every time I look, and I know it's only a matter of time before I'm the one on the other side of the glass.